"Open the door, Mr. Thompson. Your wife is under arrest." The insistent rapping sounded so sharp and steady it made the framed photographs on our living room wall tremble. Oakwood Heights was usually a picture of tranquility at this time of day. Children on bicycles, the rhythmic hiss of sprinklers, canines voicing their displeasure at the mail carrier's arrival. But that voice, it transformed my normally welcoming front porch into a scene ripped from a melodramatic crime drama. I opened the door to find 4 individuals standing shoulder to shoulder. They were clad in dark blue law enforcement attire, impeccably pressed and sharp. Each sported sunglasses that concealed their eyes, their pistols already drawn and at the ready. There were no smiles, no pleasantries, only a profound silence that signaled the imminent arrival of trouble. "Step aside, sir. She's accompanying us," the man at the forefront stated. His jaw was pronouncedly square, his tone devoid of any emotion, as if this were merely another mundane task on his agenda. For a fleeting moment, the only sound I registered was the rushing of blood in my own ears. I'm no stranger to dealing with officialdom, yet even I sensed that something was amiss. No identifying badge numbers, no name tags, no official documentation in hand, just firearms, uniforms, and an unsubstantiated claim. From somewhere down the block, a dog began to bark. Curtains in the dwelling across the street twitched. Oakwood Heights had always been a neighborhood where everything was observed, and now they were observing me, my porch, and these 4 men in blue. "You've come to the wrong residence," I declared, my hand still gripping the doorknob, "or at the very least, the wrong individuals." The leader remained unfazed. "Mr. Thompson, endeavor not to complicate matters further. Instruct her to present herself now." From behind me, I detected the gentle scuff of footsteps on the hardwood floor. My wife's voice followed, remarkably calm and measured. "Michael, what's transpiring?" I turned my head just enough to glance back. "They claim they're here for you." Her response was not one of alarm. It was as steadfast as solid rock. "I will manage this." The screen door let out a soft creak, and then Sarah emerged onto the porch. She was not in her sleepwear, and she certainly didn't appear apprehensive. She was dressed in her full sheriff's uniform, her silver badge gleaming against her chest, the morning sunlight catching its polished edges. A gentle breeze carried the faint, intermittent crackle of her shoulder-mounted radio. The 4 men shifted uneasily, as if the very ground beneath them had suddenly tilted. One man's grip on his firearm momentarily loosened, another cleared his throat audibly. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty disrupted their composed facade. Sarah's voice remained steady, not raised in anger. She didn't require it. "You are pointing weapons at my husband. Holster them immediately." The leader attempted to regain control. "Ma'am, this matter does not involve Sheriff Sarah Thompson." She interrupted him, tapping her badge. "My identification is on my belt. Dispatch is on my shoulder. If you are genuine officers, you are already aware of my identity. If you are not, you are impersonating law enforcement officers while carrying loaded firearms. That carries a penalty of 10 years in correctional facilities at a minimum." A profound silence descended. The very atmosphere seemed to thicken with tension. Somewhere across the street, the click of a phone camera echoed. I noticed old Mr. Jenkins leaning against his mailbox, meticulously recording the entire scene. The neighborhood was witnessing this, and these men were acutely aware of it. Sarah pressed the activation button on her radio, her voice resonating with the same calm authority it always possessed. "Dispatch. This is Sheriff 214 Sierra. 4 unknown individuals in dark blue uniforms are present at my residence. They are asserting a warrant for my apprehension. Please confirm any active directives." The response was immediate, loud enough for everyone on the porch to clearly hear. 214. "Sierra, negative. No outstanding warrants. Enforcement units are en route to your location. Affirmative. 4 individuals identified as impersonators." The color drained from the leader's face. He scanned left, then right, as if searching for a non-existent escape route. The second man muttered something inaudibly. The third meticulously avoided any eye contact, and the fourth, he simply stood frozen, like a shop mannequin, caught in the harsh light of day. "You have received the dispatch," Sarah stated. "Cease all weapon carriage. Place your hands where they are clearly visible and await the arrival of my deputies. Alternatively, continue your resistance and you will spend the remainder of this day providing an explanation to a judge as to why you believed it permissible to abduct a sheriff from her own front yard." The morning sun seemed to intensify, its warmth suddenly more palpable. The air grew heavier. In the distance, faint yet steadily growing, the distinct wail of sirens became audible, actual sirens. And in that very instant a realization struck me. This was not merely a simple misunderstanding. This was the prelude to something far more significant. The sirens began as a faint hum, barely perceptible beneath the morning air, but they intensified with each passing heartbeat. Genuine law enforcement was en route, and the 4 individuals garbed in dark blue uniforms understood this implicitly. I could discern it in their postures, the rigid set of their jaws, the involuntary twitching of their fingers, the furtive glances directed towards the street. The lead imposter attempted to reassert his fabricated authority. He lifted his chin and commanded, "Ma'am, we are not here to engage in discourse. You are under arrest. Advance now." Sarah remained utterly unmoved. "On what specific charge?" she inquired. Her voice was placid, almost gentle, yet it carried the undeniable weight of judicial authority. "Produce the documentation. Present the signed authorization, or admit you possess none." For a moment, an expectant silence hung in the air. The morning sun bathed us in its warmth, its rays glinting off their counterfeit badges. Across the street, Mrs. Parker stood on her porch clad in a robe, holding her mobile phone aloft. The postal worker had paused his route 2 houses away, observing the unfolding events with his mailbag still slung over his shoulder. Oakwood Heights had transcended its identity as mere residential property. It had become a theatrical stage, with the entire neighborhood as its captivated audience. The second man fidgeted uncomfortably. "Sir," he addressed me, his voice noticeably subdued, "kindly move aside. Avoid escalating the situation." I shook my head firmly. "You trespassed onto my private property, pointed firearms at me, and threatened my wife. The situation is already exceedingly difficult." Sarah advanced a step, the sunlight brilliantly illuminating her badge. "Gentlemen," she declared, her voice resonating with an unshakable conviction, "I have placed individuals in custody for infractions far less egregious than your current actions. Impersonation of law enforcement officers, the brandishing of firearms, and attempted abduction. This is a substantial list, and the approaching sirens indicate that your explanations will not be directed toward me. You will be detailing your conduct to my deputies." The leader's jaw clenched visibly. He raised his pistol higher, as if to underscore his perceived authority. "Do you imagine that badge renders you invincible?" Sarah's gaze sharpened, and for the first time, her voice acquired a steely edge. "No, but it signifies authenticity, which is more than I can attribute to yourselves." The gathering of onlookers across the street steadily increased in number. Neighbors were now openly recording, hushed whispers spreading like a contagion. Even the men in blue could discern the word "fake" being passed from one onlooker to another. The third man finally succumbed to the pressure. His hands trembled, causing the muzzle of his firearm to waver. "This was not how it was meant to transpire," he mumbled. "Silence!" the leader snapped, casting a furious glance over his shoulder. But the crack in his authority was now wide enough for everyone to perceive. Sarah seized the opportunity. "Drop your weapons," she commanded authoritatively. "Place your hands where they are visible. If you cooperate now, the district attorney might show leniency. Continue your defiance, and you will undoubtedly be the headline tonight." The sirens grew closer, their piercing sound echoing down Laurel Avenue, reverberating off the brick facades of Oakwood Heights. The leader flicked another quick glance towards the intersection, his mind weighing his limited options. Engage, flee, or surrender before a dozen recording devices and a sheriff who held every conceivable advantage. He opted for a show of force. "This is far from over," he growled menacingly. However, his hands betrayed his composure, twitching erratically, and his subordinates offered no support. One lowered his weapon. Another took a hesitant step backward. The fourth remained fixated on his footwear as if seeking answers from the souls. Sarah remained motionless, her gaze unwavering, as steady as the earth itself. And in that profound stillness, a significant realization dawned upon me. These men had approached our residence with an air of confidence, complete with their uniforms and firearms. But the instant genuine authority presented itself, they devolved into precisely what they were: charlatans indulging in a futile dress-up game. The sirens intensified their wail, tires screeching around the bend. In the subsequent moment, oscillating red and blue lights washed over the street, illuminating the lawn, the impostors, and Sarah's badge, which shone with the brilliance of a mirror, reflecting unvarnished truth. The oscillating red and blue lights flooded the street. 2 patrol vehicles screeched to a halt directly in front of our residence, their tires chirping a protest against the asphalt. Doors swung open simultaneously. Deputies, clad in tan uniforms, emerged with firearms drawn, their gazes fixed intently on the 4 men in dark blue. "Drop the weapons immediately," one deputy bellowed. The impostors hesitated, caught between maintaining their charade and acknowledging their inevitable defeat. The leader's jaw worked as if he were chewing on stones, but even he recognized the closing trap. Slowly, far too slowly, he lowered his pistol, the metallic clang against the concrete echoing the sound of surrender, louder than any threat they had previously uttered. The others followed suit one by one, their collective surrender resounding with greater force than their earlier pronouncements. Sarah remained unblinking, firmly planted on the porch, her radio still crackling softly at her shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff 214 Sierra, confirming units on scene." The reply came swiftly and with unwavering certainty, audible to every eavesdropping neighbor. "Confirmed. Units present. 4 impersonators detained." The word "impersonators" rippled through the assembled crowd like distant thunder. Across the street, Mrs. Parker emitted a startled gasp. Mr. Jenkins grumbled, "I had a feeling something was amiss." Mobile phones were raised higher, capturing every detail of the unfolding events. Our usually serene block had transformed into a dramatic stage, with the narrative of the day writing itself in real time. One of the men, appearing the youngest, stared at the ground, his wrists cuffed behind him. His lips moved in a barely audible whisper that I almost caught. "It wasn't supposed to go like this." Sarah descended the porch steps, her silver badge catching the bright sunlight. The deputies respectfully made way for her, acknowledging her unequivocal authority. This was now her dominion. "You 4 gentlemen chose the incorrect residence the wrong morning and the wrong sheriff," she stated, her voice carrying with remarkable clarity to every lens and microphone. "Oakwood Heights is secure. Your involvement concludes here." The leader finally spoke, his voice stripped of its former authority, sounding raw and bitter. "This is not the end." Sarah leaned in slightly, ensuring her words were audible only to him and myself. "It is for you." The neighborhood erupted into a low murmur of conversation, mobile phones buzzing as videos were uploaded instantaneously. By the time night fell, a significant portion of the county would have witnessed the events I had just experienced. But standing there, observing the imposters in their counterfeit uniforms being escorted into legitimate squad cars, I felt a profound shift deep within my core. This was not merely the action of 4 misguided individuals with firearms. This was a meticulously planned operation, financed and supported by someone who believed they possessed the right to dispatch armed pretenders to our doorstep. And I harbored a grim premonition that we had only just begun to uncover the extent of this conspiracy. The patrol cars remained stationary on the street, their red and blue lights reflecting off every window in Oakwood Heights. Deputies were securing the last of the 4 imposters in the back of a cruiser when another figure approached purposefully up the sidewalk. Gregory Allen, impeccably pressed khakis, a golf shirt tucked too tightly, a clipboard clutched under his arm as if it were a protective shield. He was the president of our homeowners association, the type of individual who could recite community bylaws with the fervor of a preacher quoting scripture. He marched directly into the heart of the unfolding chaos, his face flushed and his breathing labored. "This is an outrage," he barked. "You cannot simply detain them as common criminals. They were here on official business." Sarah slowly turned her head, her eyes narrowing with disbelief. "Official business?" she repeated, her tone laced with skepticism. "Yes," Gregory puffed out his chest with misplaced authority. "They are compliance officers retained by this community. They are vested with the authority to enforce regulations when residents persistently disregard established rules." His voice faltered on that last word, but he pressed on. "You have been consistently ignoring notices, Sheriff Thompson, and the board will not tolerate such exceptions." The assembled crowd, still observing from sidewalks and porches, stirred like a disturbed beehive. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, and phones were redirected, now focusing not only on the patrol cars, but also on Gregory, the man to whom they had dutifully paid their dues for years. Sarah stepped forward, her boots making a solid sound on the pavement. The deputies gave her ample space, recognizing that this had transcended a mere police matter. It had become intensely personal. "Compliance officers," she stated, her tone even yet sharp enough to slice through glass. "Legitimate compliance officers do not wear dark blue law enforcement uniforms, brandish firearms at civilians, nor do they purport to possess arrest warrants signed by fictitious magistrates." Gregory's face turned blotchy, perspiration beading on his forehead under the intense sun. "You are distorting the facts. They were merely performing their duties." "They impersonated law enforcement," Sarah exclaimed, her voice finally rising in clear indignation. "That is a felony offense, and you," she jabbed a finger accusingly towards his clipboard, "you financed this endeavor. You have endangered this entire neighborhood." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Mrs. Parker murmured, "Paid for it?" loud enough for 3 recording devices to capture the comment. Gregory attempted to backtrack defensively. "Now hold on a moment. The board did approve certain security measures, nothing more. Security does not involve pointing loaded firearms at my husband and on our very own front porch," Sarah countered sharply. "And it certainly does not involve falsified warrants. You refer to this as compliance? A jury will undoubtedly classify it as something far more severe." For the first time in years, Gregory appeared diminutive. He cast anxious glances at his neighbors, the same individuals who had offered polite nods to his newsletters and signed his petitions without scrutinizing the fine print. Now, their gazes burned holes through him. Someone from the rear of the gathering shouted, "You put us all at risk." Another added, "My children were playing outside." Mobile phones remained active, recording. Every word spoken served as potential evidence. Gregory's hand trembled as it gripped his clipboard, as if he wished to brandish it as a shield. But any pretense of protection had evaporated. Not from Sarah, not from the law, and certainly not from his neighbors, who were finally seeing him for who he truly was. And standing there, I understood that the imposters were not the primary threat. The real danger lay with the man who believed he could purchase their allegiance. For a brief moment, Oakwood Heights held its breath. Deputies stood with their hands resting on their holsters. Neighbors crowded the sidewalks, their mobile phone screens glowing like ephemeral lanterns. Gregory Allen, his face flushed and his voice sputtering, attempted to maintain his narrative regarding compliance officers, and then everything began to unravel. One of the imposters, the one with the conspicuously jittery hands and a prominent scar extending down his cheek, suddenly lunged. His wrists were cuffed in front of him, a sloppy oversight by the deputies who were still occupied with apprehending the others. With a guttural roar, he broke free of the deputy's grasp and charged directly at Sarah. The crowd gasped. Mrs. Parker shrieked. He had one arm raised, the steel handcuffs swinging like a makeshift weapon, while his other hand reached towards the cuffs affixed to Sarah's belt. "You're coming with us, Sheriff," he bellowed, flecks of spittle flying from his lips. Time seemed to decelerate, as it often does in moments destined for indelible memory. I witnessed the sunlight glinting off the cuff as it descended, I observed Sarah's eyes narrow, her expression as placid as a surgeon's before initiating a critical procedure, and then she moved. She pivoted on her heel with astonishing speed, intercepted his swinging arm mid-arc, and executed a swift, decisive twist. The sharp crack of bone echoed across the lawn with the startling report of a firearm. His enraged shout transformed into a pained howl as she expertly swept his legs out from beneath him. He collapsed onto the porch with a heavy thud, face first, his cuffed hands pinned painfully behind his back. Sarah planted her knee firmly on his shoulder and, in one fluid motion, detached the handcuffs from her belt. "Attempted assault on a sheriff," she stated, her voice piercing through his groans of agony. "Add that to your growing list of charges." The neighborhood erupted into a cacophony of sound, cheers, shouts, and a unified chorus of clicking phone cameras. Mr. Jenkins bellowed, "Get him, Sheriff!" Someone else hollered, "About time!" The deputies swarmed forward, securing the man properly this time, double-locking the handcuffs and dragging him upright. His scarred face had turned pale, sweat now dripping from his temple. The fight had been completely extinguished from him. Sarah rose to her feet, casually brushing dust from her uniform. Her badge gleamed with renewed brilliance in the morning sun. She appeared utterly unfazed, not even slightly out of breath. Gregory Allen retreated a step, his eyes darting between Sarah, the crowd, and the deputies. His argument about compliance officers had vanished, drowned out by the undeniable evidence of violence. He muttered, "This was not how it was supposed to unfold." But his words were swallowed by the din of the surrounding commotion. I caught Sarah's gaze, and for the first time that morning, I truly comprehended her objective. This was not merely a defensive maneuver, this was an act of public exposure. She was not solely protecting herself, she was demonstrably revealing to the entire neighborhood, broadcast on numerous cameras, precisely who the genuine threats were. The leader of the imposters, still standing cuffed near the patrol car, attempted one final display of defiance. "You believe this concludes everything?" he declared with forced bravado. "We are not alone." Sarah's gaze settled upon him as unwavering as solid rock. "Then let them come," she responded calmly. "I will be prepared." The man averted his eyes. He had no rejoinder. The neighbors pressed closer, forming a protective perimeter around Gregory, around the deputies, and around us. Questions spilled forth in rapid succession. Who orchestrated this? How did they obtain the uniforms? Why was our neighborhood targeted? Sarah raised a hand, effectively quieting the clamor. "There will be answers," she promised reassuringly. "But for the present, the immediate danger is contained. You are all safe. That is what truly matters." Her words had a calming effect like water extinguishing a fire. The collective fear of the crowd transformed into a resolute determination. People nodded in agreement, murmuring their gratitude. They raised their phones higher, ensuring every moment would be meticulously documented and shared. Gregory's face turned ashen. For years, he had occupied a position of authority within this neighborhood, issuing pronouncements regarding lawn maintenance and mailbox aesthetics. Now he seemed to shrink under the weight of 100 scrutinizing eyes, under the stark realization that the narrative unfolding here was no longer his to manipulate. I stood on that porch, feeling the oppressive heat of the morning, and experienced a profound sense of settling deep within my chest. The imposters had made their move. Sarah had countered it decisively, but lurking beneath the surface was something far more sinister, something deliberately orchestrated. This was not a random occurrence. It was a calculated plan, and judging by the way Gregory Allen steadfastly avoided meeting anyone's gaze, I had a clear indication of where the investigation would inevitably lead next. The groans of the impostor, still sprawled on the porch where Sarah had unceremoniously deposited him, were nearly drowned out by the escalating wail of approaching sirens. More patrol vehicles screeched around the corner. 3, then 4. Their lights painted every house in oscillating hues of red and blue. Oakwood Heights, usually a bastion of quietude, now resembled the epicenter of a high-stakes manhunt. Deputies spilled out with rapid, forceful movements. Shotguns were leveled. Commands were shouted with unwavering authority. The air crackled with a palpable sense of power that could not be feigned. Hands above your heads. Kneel on the ground immediately. The 3 remaining impostors dropped swiftly to their knees, their previous bravado utterly dissolved. They knelt on the asphalt, their cuffed wrists pulled tightly behind them. The leader attempted to shout something, perhaps a protest or a threat, but a deputy forcefully propelled him against the side of the cruiser and began reciting his rights. His voice abruptly ceased, choked into silence. Neighbors erupted in cheers, genuine, unrestrained cheers, as if we were at a sporting event. Mobile phones were ubiquitous, capturing the scene from porches, yards, and even the roof of Mr. Jenkins' garage. Children who had been ushered indoors just 30 minutes prior now peered wide-eyed through their curtains. Gregory Allen stood frozen at the curb, clutching his clipboard as if it were a lifeline. With every barked order from a deputy, he flinched. He had craved control, but now he appeared to be the most insignificant figure in Oakwood Heights. Sarah remained composed, her hands clasped behind her back, her silver badge glinting prominently. She did not need to shout. This was her arena, and everyone present acknowledged it. A sergeant approached, offering a crisp salute. "Sheriff, we have them secured. Their weapons have been confiscated. No identification, no departmental markings found, only the uniforms." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Ensure they are booked for impersonating law enforcement officers, unlawful detainment, brandishing a firearm, and attempted assault. We will compile the appropriate charges once we have obtained their statements." The sergeant's gaze flickered briefly towards Gregory, then back to Sarah. Sarah allowed the unspoken question to hang in the charged air. Every neighbor leaned in, their anticipation palpable, hungry for her response. Gregory swallowed audibly, his face pale, but remained silent. "Not at this juncture," Sarah finally stated, her voice low but firm. "However, do not permit him to depart. He has questions that require answering." The sergeant nodded, motioning for a deputy to discreetly keep Mr. Allen in his sight. The HOA president's lips twitched, as if he harbored a desire to voice an objection, but he understood the futility of challenging her authority at this moment. As the impostors were systematically loaded into the rear compartments of the patrol cruisers, Sarah ascended a single step back onto our porch. She surveyed the assembled crowd, her demeanor as steady as the earth. "You all witnessed this," she announced, her voice carrying clearly to all present. "These men arrived here under the pretense of being law enforcement officers. They were not. They attempted to detain me, your sheriff, using fabricated authority and loaded weapons. That situation concludes today. This neighborhood is secure, and whoever orchestrated this," her gaze sharply fixed on Gregory, who visibly shrank an inch lower, "will be held accountable." Applause erupted spontaneously. It was not polite clapping. It was a raw, indignant expression of relief. Neighbors shouted their thanks. Someone yelled, "We have your back, Sheriff." Another added, "It's about time someone stood up to the board." Gregory's hands trembled as he clutched his clipboard. He scanned the crowd, searching for an ally, but found none. Every camera phone was trained on him, every lens focused on his exertion and the quiet he maintained. For the first time, in what felt like an eternity, I found myself able to draw a breath. The impostors were gone, and the street was alive with genuine officers. The residents, united by their shared indignation, had come together. In that fleeting moment, a sense of triumph washed over me, yet Sarah's expression remained serious. I recognized that look. The one that signaled her mind was already several steps ahead. She leaned in, her voice barely audible, a hushed whisper meant only for my ears. "This wasn't spontaneous," she breathed. "Someone orchestrated this, funded it, and I suspect we both know who." My gaze shifted to Gregory. He shifted his stance, his eyes darting nervously, like a cornered creature. The police vehicles began to depart, one by one, conveying the false officers to temporary holding and public scrutiny. The neighborhood hummed with a mixture of relief and lingering anger. For the first time in a considerable period, the established order in Oakwood Heights had been disrupted, and yet Amidst the assembled crowd, our homeowners association president still clutched his paperwork, his hand trembling, his thoughts already on his next maneuver. Just as the last of the police cruisers pulled away, a deputy trotted back across the lawn, a folded document held carefully in his gloved hand. He appeared uneasy, as if the paper itself emanated an unpleasant aura. "Sheriff," he announced, "you need to examine this. We discovered it in the coat pocket of the individual with the scar." Sarah accepted the paper, unfolding it with deliberate care. I moved closer to get a glimpse. It bore the hallmarks of authenticity. County letterhead adorned the top, beneath which a judge's seal was prominently stamped. Large, bold lettering declared, "Order of Detention." My wife's name was prominently displayed directly below. Pages of complex legal text followed, detailing the purported justifications for an arrest. At the very bottom, a signature was present, though it was less a signature and more a smudged imprint, as if painstakingly copied from memory or perhaps sourced from an online image. The judge named on the document had officially retired 3 years prior. Sarah's jaw tightened. "They didn't just fabricate uniforms," she stated, her voice low and measured. "They falsified a judicial order." The deputy nodded grimly. "And Sheriff, look at the footer." At the very bottom, rendered in a significantly smaller font, was a line of text. "Prepared by Community Compliance Division." Adjacent to it was a diminutive emblem, 2 houses superimposed within a circle. This was not an official county insignia. It belonged to the HOA. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered neighbors as Sarah read the text aloud. "Prepared by Community Compliance Division," she echoed, her voice now sharp and piercing. Gregory Allen's complexion paled dramatically. His clipboard seemed to sag in his grasp. That's not what it appears to be," he stammered. "Oh, really?" Sarah turned, holding the document aloft so that every camera could capture it. "Because it certainly looks like you hired impersonators to brandish fraudulent arrest warrants, complete with forged signatures, and then dispatch them to my residence." A wave of murmurs surged across the lawn. Mr. Jenkins exclaimed, "He forged official court documents?" Another voice from the rear of the gathering boomed, "That's a felony." Gregory raised a trembling hand. "No, please, listen. This was a misunderstanding, a clerical error. The Compliance Committee handled—" "The Compliance Committee does not issue warrants," Sarah interjected sharply. "Courts do. Judges do. And you, Gregory Allen, are neither." The cameras on the phones zoomed in on his blotchy face, sweat trickling down his temples. For years, Gregory had exerted his authority over Oakwood Heights through the dissemination of newsletters, the imposition of fines, and an atmosphere of intimidation. But the crowd was no longer listening to him. They were closing in. Sarah folded the paper precisely, slid it into an evidence bag offered by a deputy, and sealed it with a decisive snap. "Chain of custody," she stated firmly. "This is going directly to the district attorney." Gregory's lips moved silently, as if he were attempting to pray without the words. The neighbors drew closer, their hushed conversations sharp as blades. Someone hissed, "All those fines! How many were legitimate?" Another muttered, "He's been embezzling funds for years." The sun beat down with intensity, but Gregory's world had already plunged into darkness. He had been apprehended in the act by the very person he could never intimidate. I glanced at Sarah. Her attention had shifted from Gregory to the evidence bag in the deputy's hand, the counterfeit warrant that served as the linchpin. In her gaze, I perceived the truth. This was far more than a petty homeowners association dispute. It was a meticulously planned conspiracy involving official documentation, financial backing, and a clear intention to instill fear. And we had only just uncovered the initial piece of the puzzle. By the time the police vehicles completed their departures for processing, Oakwood Heights resembled a street festival orchestrated by law enforcement. Deputies had cordoned off the area, residents congregated in small groups, and every mobile device vibrated with breaking news alerts from local news outlets. The narrative had already begun to spread. Sarah stood with the sergeant near the rear of a police cruiser, reviewing documents. I remained close enough to overhear their exchange. The evidence bag containing the fraudulent warrant lay on the hood of the vehicle, the sunlight glinting off the plastic. "Sheriff," the sergeant said, "we traced the footer from that document. The Community Compliance Division isn't a county entity. It's a front operation linked to a private firm, Community Security Solutions, LLC. Sarah's brow furrowed. "Cease," he confirmed. "Based in Houston, they advertise customized neighborhood enforcement services. Essentially, HOAs contract them to manage violations, though they've been flagged twice previously for exceeding their authority, including trespassing and harassment. Nothing quite this audacious, however." A shiver traced its way down my spine. "So, they've engaged in similar activities before." "Not with this level of convincing impersonation," the sergeant replied. "These weren't just amateur actors. They were equipped with tactical gear, service sidearms, and fabricated warrants. Someone provided them with substantial funding." Sarah crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on the counterfeit order. "And Gregory Allen signed the checks." As if on cue, Gregory shuffled forward, still accompanied by a deputy. His clipboard was nowhere to be seen, and his hands fidgeted restlessly. He now resembled a cornered bureaucrat rather than a president. "Sheriff," he stated hastily, "you're misinterpreting the situation. This was intended as a standard procedure. They assured me they possessed the necessary authority. It was a straightforward compliance action." "Stop," Sarah commanded, cutting him off. "You hired impersonators. You provided them with my name and dispatched them to my home armed with forged documents and weapons. That isn't compliance, that's conspiracy." Gregory opened and closed his mouth, attempting to speak. The board authorized it." "The board did not sign this contract," Sarah countered, holding up the evidence bag. "You did." The neighbors pressed closer, eager to absorb every word. Mr. Jenkins interjected. "So that's where our dues were going." Another voice demanded. "You jeopardized our children for this?" Gregory's face flushed crimson. "It's not like that. It's... But his weak justifications were drowned out by the rising clamor of the crowd. Every flicker of his expression was being captured by the ubiquitous phones. The sergeant tapped his tablet, bringing up a screen for Sarah's perusal. "Observe this. CS has been implicated in incidents across 3 other subdivisions. One in Dallas, where a family was forcibly removed from their property after repeated enforcement raids. Another in Baton Rouge, involving an elderly couple subjected to harassment with fabricated liens. And last year in Tulsa, an entire neighborhood was fined for unauthorized mailboxes." Sarah's eyes narrowed, recognizing a pattern. "They're not enforcing rules. They're testing the limits of intimidation. And here," the sergeant added, pointing to Oakwood Heights on the screen, the crowd had fallen silent again, attentively listening. The names of other cities hung heavily in the air. This was no longer solely their localized problem. It was a scheme that spanned multiple states. Sarah's voice cut through the stillness. "Community Security Solutions is now under investigation. Every check, every notice, every so-called violation this HOA processed through them constitutes evidence." She turned to Gregory. "And you, Mr. Allen, bear personal responsibility for unleashing them upon your neighbors." Gregory visibly wilted, his shoulders slumping. I didn't know." "You knew enough to write the checks," Sarah retorted. "You knew enough to sign the contract, and you knew enough to target me because you believed the sheriff wouldn't retaliate within her own community." Gasps echoed. A deputy opened a second evidence bag, carefully placing Gregory's clipboard and a stack of HOA invoices bearing the Community Security Solutions stamp inside. The sound of the seal snapping shut was definitive, akin to the closing of a cell door. I stood watching, the gravity of the situation pressing down on me. This was no longer a mere disagreement about mailboxes or shrubbery. This was organized intimidation, corporate power masquerading as legal authority. And observing this, I realized something profound. If CSS had engaged in scams in Dallas, Baton Rouge, and Tulsa, Oakwood Heights was merely another location on their operational map. We were caught in the midst of something considerably larger. By evening, Oakwood Heights was no longer the same neighborhood it had been that morning. News vans lined the curb, deputies continued to patrol the street, and the HOA clubhouse, usually sparsely populated on meeting nights, was packed to capacity. I sat towards the rear, shoulder to shoulder with neighbors I'd acknowledged for years but had never truly conversed with. Tonight, however, we were not strangers. We were a collective of individuals united by anger, restless for answers. Gregory Allen stood at the front, his ever-present clipboard in hand, though his shirt was now rumpled and his voice already quivering. He attempted to project his usual calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us maintain order. What transpired this morning was an unfortunate misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" a voice erupted from the crowd. "They had firearms. They attempted to detain the sheriff." Another voice chimed in, quickly drowned out by applause and shouts. Gregory raised both hands. "Please, allow me to explain. The board authorized enhanced enforcement measures through Community Security Solutions. Their methods may have exceeded expectations, but it was for the benefit of the community." Phones were raised like torches. Neighbors booed. One man shouted, "We did not vote for that." Sarah stepped forward from the side of the room, her uniform immaculate, her badge gleaming. The clubhouse fell silent, not out of deference to Gregory, but to her. "This morning," she began, her voice steady, "4 armed individuals in counterfeit police uniforms appeared at my residence. They leveled loaded weapons at my husband. They brandished a forged court order bearing my name, and they claimed legitimate authority under your HOA." Gasps swept through the room. Even those who had viewed footage online appeared shaken, hearing the account directly from her. Sarah held up an evidence bag. Within it lay the forged warrant, now sealed and labeled. "This is not hearsay. This is evidence. It bears the HOA's insignia, the designation of a shell company, and the fingerprints of one Gregory Allen." Every phone in the room focused on him. Gregory's face flushed. He sputtered, That's taken out of context." "No context justifies impersonating law enforcement," Sarah retorted sharply. "No context justifies endangering children on their way to school or neighbors stepping onto their porches to record. What you funded today was not compliance. It was criminal." A murmur of agreement swelled, growing louder with each of Sarah's pronouncements. Sarah turned towards the crowd. "You all contribute dues. You all placed your trust in this board. Ask yourselves, where did your money go?" At that precise moment, a deputy set up a projector. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life, displaying raw video footage from that morning. The imposters pounding on our door, me opening it, Sarah emerging in her uniform. The crowd witnessed the instant weapons were aimed at me. They heard Sarah's radio confirmation that no warrants existed. 4 impersonators. They observed her subdue the man with the scar on the porch, handling him like a sack of flour. When the lights returned, the room erupted. Shouts, curses, and neighbors pointing at Gregory as if he were already in handcuffs. "Resign!" someone roared. "You put us all in danger!" another exclaimed. "My children were outside when this occurred." Gregory's voice cracked as he attempted to shout over them. I acted in the community's best interest." Sarah raised her hand, effortlessly silencing the room. "The community speaks for itself tonight, and it says you abused your position, you endangered families, you hired criminals and labeled them officers. That ends now." The ensuing silence was not passive. It was a charged, burning quiet. Every pair of eyes bore down on Gregory. Even his closest allies on the board leaned back in their chairs, conspicuously avoiding any appearance of solidarity. I surveyed the scene and felt it acutely. The neighborhood had fundamentally changed. People were not merely angry, they were awakened. Sarah stepped back, folding her arms. "The floor is yours," she announced to the crowd. And with that, Oakwood Heights erupted into a phenomenon we had never before witnessed: genuine democracy. Voices clashed, residents shouted, fingers pointed accusingly at Gregory. Demands for his resignation rolled through the clubhouse like thunder. For the first time, Gregory Allen was not in command of Oakwood Heights. The populace was. The clubhouse seemed to ignite. not with heat, but with the sheer volume of voices. Neighbors shouted over one another, demanding justice, holding their phones aloft like torches at a public trial. Gregory Allen stood at the front, his clipboard trembling in his hands, sweat darkening the collar of his golf shirt. For years, he had governed Oakwood Heights with the instruments of fines, threats, and incessant letters affixed to doors. Tonight the walls were closing in. Sarah allowed the cacophony to swell before raising her hand. "Order!" she commanded, her tone not raised in a shout, but imbued with the steady authority of someone who had navigated far more perilous situations than this. The crowd settled, not out of respect for Gregory, but for her. "Your HOA president," she continued, gesturing directly at Gregory, "authorized armed impersonators to invade this community. He signed checks to Community Security Solutions, who dressed criminals in uniforms and sent them to my home with fraudulent documents. That is not leadership. That is betrayal." Applause thundered. Someone shouted, "Remove him!" Another yelled, "We are finished with you, Gregory." Gregory's voice cracked as he attempted to salvage his position. "You are all overreacting. This was a mistake. A clerical, administrative—" "Clerical doesn't point a gun at a homeowner," a man in the back snapped. "Clerical doesn't forge a judge's signature." Laughter, bitter and laced with anger, swept through the room. Gregory's arguments dissolved into nothingness before they even left his lips. Sarah stepped aside, yielding the stage to the people. "This is your meeting, your decision. You will determine whether this man speaks for you tomorrow or whether tonight Oakwood Heights finally reclaims its voice." Her words acted like a spark. Mrs. Parker, typically as quiet as a mouse, rose from her folding chair. Her voice quivered slightly, but her hand was steady as she raised it high. "I make a motion to remove Gregory Allen as HOA president, effective immediately." Cheers erupted. Dozens of hands shot up. Phones captured every second of the proceedings. Gregory's face drained of color. He stammered, That's not in order. The bylaws require 30 days' notice," Sarah interjected, her voice as crisp as a gavel. "The bylaws do not shield felonies. Fraud nullifies authority. And tonight, the people have spoken." The board members beside Gregory shifted uncomfortably. One leaned into his microphone, his voice soft. "Seconded." "And just like that," Sarah declared, "the motion was officially made. All in favor?" Her gaze swept the room. A sea of hands ascended. Phones illuminated the air like 1,000 tiny stars. Voices chanted in unison, "Aye, aye, aye." Gregory clutched his clipboard as if it were an anchor, his hands trembling, his mouth opening and closing, but no words emerged. For the first time, the man who had fined residents for bird feeders and mailbox paint had nothing to say. "All opposed?" Sarah inquired. Only silence answered. The gavel she had borrowed from the board chair cracked down on the table. "Motion carried," she announced. "Effective tonight, Gregory Allen is removed as president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association." The room exploded with renewed fervor. Neighbors clapped, shouted, and embraced. Phones buzzed with live streams broadcasting the moment to the world. Even the local reporter in the back stood grinning, already composing his headline. Gregory sagged into his chair, deflated, his clipboard sliding from his grasp onto the floor with a dull clatter, but Sarah wasn't finished. "Listen to me," she said, her voice cutting through the cheers. "Tonight is not merely about removing one individual, it is about dismantling the culture of fear that allowed him to believe he could hire thugs in uniform to control you. From this moment forward, Oakwood Heights will not be governed by threats. You will embrace transparency. You will demand accountability. You will lead yourselves." Her words reverberated through the room like thunder. Faces glowed with a sentiment I hadn't witnessed in months. Hope. Gregory finally found his voice, but it was weak and trembling. You don't understand. You've made enemies, far larger than me, far larger than this neighborhood. They will come after you." Sarah's eyes hardened. "Let them. I will still be standing." Deputies then stepped forward, not to apprehend Gregory at that precise moment, but to escort him out. His face was pale, his steps faltering, his shoulders hunched under the immense weight of humiliation. Phones tracked his every movement until he reached the door. When it slammed shut behind him, the clubhouse erupted once more, even louder than before. I looked around and felt it resonate deep within me. Oakwood Heights had reached a turning point. The fear had dissipated. The people were awake. And Sarah had ignited the catalyst. However, Gregory's parting words echoed in my mind. Bigger than me, bigger than this neighborhood. And deep down, I knew this was a victory, but it was not the conclusion. The following morning, Oakwood Heights awoke to a different kind of siren's wail. Not that of the police, but of the media. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes pointed skyward, and reporters clustered at the block's end, microphones poised, their voices urgent. Helicopters thumped overhead, circling like predatory birds. By breakfast, Oakwood Heights was featured on every major television network. Clips from neighbors' phones played on a relentless loop. The forceful pounding on our door, the imposter's aggressive shouts, Sarah stepping onto the porch, her badge flashing in the sunlight, and the decisive moment she subdued the scarred man, all framed as the pivotal turning point. By noon, the headlines scrolled across national news broadcasts. Sheriff's neighborhood targeted by fake cops, HOA president ousted amid scandal. This was no longer just a local affair. The district attorney convened a press conference, standing stiffly behind a podium flanked by flags. We are pursuing charges of falsification of legal documents, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. Community Security Solutions, LLC, is currently under federal review. We will not tolerate criminal intimidation disguised as neighborhood enforcement. Reporters shouted questions. One inquired if Gregory Allen himself faced charges. The DA's jaw tightened. No one is above the law. If evidence links him to criminal acts, he will be prosecuted. That clip disseminated almost as rapidly as the footage from our porch. By evening, social media blazed with hashtags: Mamo fake cops, Mamos ho scandal, Mamos sheriff vs HOA. Memes proliferated like wildfire. Sarah's badge was photoshopped onto movie posters. Gregory's sweaty visage was paired with captions such as "Neighborhood tyrant down." Neighbors who had once retreated behind closed doors now spoke boldly to cameras. Mrs. Parker, her hair still in curlers, informed one reporter, "We were afraid of Gregory. He fined me for a flagpole, but now he's finished. Sheriff Sarah gave us back our voices. It was chaotic, it was loud, but it was justice served openly." Still, beneath the clamor, the danger had not vanished. That night, Sarah sat at our kitchen table, her laptop open, files spread around her. Deputies had delivered stacks of invoices retrieved from Gregory's clipboard. Payments had been routed from HOA dues directly to CSS, with line items for compliance enforcement, totaling tens of thousands. "This isn't just about Oakwood Heights," she murmured, rubbing her temples. "CS is employing the same tactic in neighborhoods across 3 states. They test boundaries, gauging how far intimidation can go before someone pushes back." I leaned against the counter, observing her. "And you were the pushback," she offered a weary smile. "And now they know precisely who stood in their way." That thought settled heavily in the room. Later the phone rang, late enough that my gut tightened. Sarah answered, her voice steady. It was the governor's office. They requested her presence at the Capitol by Monday to brief them on community safety vulnerabilities. By the time she hung up, her expression had hardened. "This is no longer just about an HOA. The state requires answers." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Gregory had issued a cautionary statement, implying the situation transcended his personal capacity. What if his words held genuine weight? Sarah closed the document before her and met my gaze, her expression a blend of keen intellect and profound exhaustion. "If that's the case, then our objective extends beyond merely rectifying matters in Oakwood Heights. We are exposing a far more extensive operation, and once this endeavor is initiated, there will be no turning back." Outside, the street had resumed its tranquility, the clamor of media crews and law enforcement vehicles gradually receding into the night. Yet for the first time since this ordeal commenced, the quiet did not bring a sense of relief. Instead, I felt the ominous presence of an approaching tempest. Oakwood Heights had achieved a local victory. However, the broader conflict, one that reached far beyond our immediate community, was only now beginning. 2 weeks later, the community center that once resonated with Gregory Allen's pronouncements stood deserted. Its windows were dark, its bulletin boards completely cleared. The man who had once levied fines against residents for trivial matters like bird feeders and the hue of their homes was conspicuously absent. Gregory's departure was far from discreet. Law enforcement officers apprehended him in broad daylight, with cameras capturing the event and neighbors offering vociferous approval. The accusations were severe: conspiracy, fraud, reckless endangerment, and the misappropriation of funds. His clipboard, formerly a symbol of his authority, was meticulously documented as evidence. On the very same day, federal operatives executed a raid on the Houston branch of Community Security Solutions. Media reports depicted the removal of numerous boxes, the confiscation of digital storage devices, and the escort of executives clad in attire that appeared far less imposing under the restraint of handcuffs. A journalist reported that CSS held contracts spanning 12 distinct neighborhoods across 3 different states, all of which were now subject to rigorous scrutiny. Oakwood Heights experienced a palpable sense of liberation. Mailboxes were once again adorned with flags. Children rode their bicycles freely, unburdened by the anxious vigilance of their parents watching from behind fences. The pervasive fear had dissipated, supplanted by a sentiment that had been absent for years: freedom. Neighbors stopped Sarah on the street to express their gratitude, with some hailing her as a heroine. She responded with a simple smile, a modest shake of her head, stating she was merely fulfilling her duties. However, I understood the true extent of her commitment. She had not simply performed her job, she had risked everything: our home, our peace of mind, to challenge an organization designed to suppress individuals like us. One evening, after the initial upheaval had subsided, we sat on our porch, enjoying cups of coffee. The air was pleasantly cool, and the rhythmic chirping of cicadas filled the trees. For the first time in weeks, there were no flashing lights, no raised voices, no persistent reporters, only a profound quiet. Sarah leaned back, her gaze fixed on the deepening twilight sky. "Oakwood Heights will recover," she murmured softly. "But this is far from over." I expressed my confusion. "Gregory is gone. CSS is defunct. What else could there be?" She turned her steady, discerning eyes towards me. Gregory was a manifestation of a deeper issue. CSS was merely a mechanism. Someone financed them, propelled them forward, and provided them with protection. Such an extensive network cannot be established without significant financial backing and influential allies. Her words resonated deeply within me, like a heavy stone dropped into my chest. I recalled Gregory's warning at the community center. It was beyond him, beyond our neighborhood. At the time, it had sounded like the desperate plea of a cornered man. Now it felt like an accurate foretelling. We sat in contemplative silence for a considerable period, the encroaching night enveloping us. Across the street, Mrs. Parker's porch light flickered on. Further down the block, the sounds of children's laughter indicated their uninhibited return to childhood. A semblance of normalcy was returning, but beneath its surface, a more sinister undercurrent was at play. I looked at Sarah, the subtle gleam of her badge catching the porch light. She was more than my wife. She represented the boundary between order and utter pandemonium. And the chaos was by no means extinguished. When I finally broke the silence, my voice was hushed. "So, what happens when the next threat emerges?" She continued to gaze at the sky, unperturbed. "Then we will be prepared." In that moment, I found myself believing her. Yet, a quiet apprehension lingered within me, a certainty that the turmoil that began on our porch had not concluded with Gregory Allen's downfall. It had merely revealed its initial form. Somewhere beyond the confines of Oakwood Heights, within unseen offices and boardrooms, the true adversaries were observing, patiently awaiting their moment, and this time they were aware of who we were.